All right. Hello, class. Our project is on comparative performance and competitive balance in Major League Soccer leagues from 2020 to 2025. I'm Jameer. My group mates are Aidan and Mitchell. All right, so a brief introduction about our project. So competitive balance has always been one of the biggest debates in European soccer. Fans argue all the time about which leagues are really competitive and which ones are dominated by the same few teams each year. For our project, we looked at competitive balance across seven major leagues from 2020 to 2025. This time period matters because it included things like COVID, major spending changes, and growing gaps between big clubs and smaller clubs. So it was a good window to see how competition shifted. Instead of using win percentages, we use total points and perfect points because soccer has draws and the point system gives clear picture of how evenly teams actually earn results. Overall, our goal was to compare how each league is within a season and see how competitive they really are. This study matters because a big reason is because a lot of fans throw around the label like farmer leagues all the time, especially towards Li- Ligue 1 and Eredivisie. But most of these claims aren't based on any real data. They're just based off of opinions or just bias. People also assume that the Premier League is automatically the toughest and most competitive league, but being the strongest doesn't always mean it's the most competitive. Past research shows that talent levels and spending don't always match competitive balance. And with COVID and financial changes, hitting different leagues in different ways, this period saw a lot of shifts. So we wanted to answer a simple question: which leagues are actually the most competitive between 2020 and 2025? For our hypothesis, um, we said that the Premier League has the lowest within season ratio out of all the seven leagues, meaning it would be the most competitive. Basically, we wanted to test the Premier League's reputation against real numbers.
Yeah, so for methodology, we were looking at this study is based on a quantitative research and is overall like a secondary data analysis. So there was no new data collected and only existing data was analyzed. So to find competitive balance, we created a baseline measure that Jameer talked about that's called perfect points. For perfect points, how that works is there's different amount of perfect points for each league because some leagues have 20 teams and some leagues have 18 teams. So for a 20-team league, the perfect points was 51. So each team plays 38 matches, so that's 13 wins, 13 losses, and 12 draws. For the 18 team leagues, the perfect points was 45 because each uh, team plays 34 matches, which is 11 wins, 11 losses, and 12 draws. We thought it was very important that the wins and losses cancel each other out to keep that perfect 500 win percentage. And again, the reason why we chose not to do win percentage is because draws are so common in soccer. Whereas in football, in basketball, and baseball, I mean, some of those draws don't even exist. They can't happen. And so we wanted to be able to keep that competitive balance within draws as well. Uh, so next we calculated the within season variance. We calculated the ideal variance, and then we used the within season variance, divided it by the ideal variance, and we found the competitive ratio for each league. Next slide, please. So this is a look at some of the graphs for our leagues. So as we see here, England and Spain. They were supposed to be the two strongest leagues. That's typically the reputation of them. Uh, but they are both sort of in the middle of the pack. And the two farmers leagues you see is typically Germany, France are typically considered the farmers leagues, and they actually have the lowest, which is very interesting. Um, sorry. And moving on, we just to see some stuff that we, just noticed initially from the results that we have is that um, for a sign of a non-competitive league, it tended to be the upper threshold that forced the ratio to increase rather than the lower half. Obviously, from an upper half or lower half, it will increase the ratio. If it could drag it up, and even if it's down, it still drags it up. However, in the English Premier League, there were only two seasons where one team had over 80 points. That was 2020 to 2021, where Manchester City had 86, and 2024 to 2025, where Liverpool had 84. These were the two seasons with the lowest ratio amongst the 5 years. And the other seasons, there was always at least two teams with 80 plus points. And in 2023, their least competitive year, they had three teams over 80 points. However, there seemed to be no real correlation with teams that finished with less than 30 points in years with higher ratios. This same pattern follows into the Spanish La Liga, but very slightly with the Italian Serie A. As in years where they only had one team tally over 80 points, it would be significantly higher than 80. So those were 90, 91, and 94. Next slide, please. These are a look at some of the other graphs. So obviously you see Italy, France, Portugal, and Netherlands. And so looking at the Portuguese league, the least competitive league, um, the same four teams always dominate at the top. So that was Sporting CP, Benfica FC, Porto FC, and Braga. And in each of the past 5 years, these four teams finished in the top four in some order. And they never had less than 64 points. This type of top-heavy dominance clearly leads to an uncompetitive league, as they were the most uncompetitive league. For some signs of competitive league, there was much more congestion within the middle of the table. While there may be teams that dominate the championship position, like Bayern Munich, who's won four of the last five Bundesliga titles, and Paris Saint-Germain, who has won four of the five Ligue 1 titles, the rest of the league evens out, making the remaining spots more competitive. And again, there doesn't seem to be any correlation among the lower table points and competitiveness of the league. I'm good. Next slide.
So for our discussion on this slide, we're looking at the big picture and what the numbers that we looked at actually are telling us. So we found that no league comes close to a perfect competitive balance. All the ratios, the lowest that we had, like Mitchell mentioned, was in League One at 1.49, so around 1.5, but most of the ratios ended up going over 2. Um, but that doesn't mean that all leagues are the same. Like League One in the Bundesliga consistently have the lowest ratios, making them the most competitive, which means that again, their points were just more tightly put together. But then on the other hand, League of Portugal and in some seasons, the Dutch league had the highest ratios and were the most top heavy. So instead of thinking of if a league is balanced and that a league is unbalanced, a better way to look at this is in degrees of imbalance. So all 7 leagues are uneven to some extent, but it just comes down to which leagues are less uneven than the others. Next slide, or excuse me, the Peters and Szymanski study. Previous slide, please. Peters and Szymanski talk about financial fair play, which was meant to control overspending, but even in practice, it's still letting the largest clubs keep winning because they already had the built-in highest revenues. So the ratios kind of reflect that there's already imbalance. Sorry, next slide now, please. So looking at these patterns a little bit further, Vroman, his study describes what we've kind of gone over in class, that leagues are natural cartels and revenue concentrated. So this allows the small number of clubs to dominate, and the asymmetric home markets are a part of creating this unbalance. So the large clubs have that built-in just spending power that can't be undone by regulations. A clear example of this is Liga Portugal, where clubs like Benfica, Porto, and Sporting earn significantly more than others in the league because they constantly qualify for European competitions and have the most spending power. Then when we look at Delotti's football money league, it looks at the top 20 clubs in the world and that the top 20 clubs alone earned 11.2 billion euros, so roughly 13 billion USD in the 2023-2024 season alone. And Real Madrid was the first club to earn over 1 billion euros in revenue in a single season. So a lot of this comes from broadcasting, sponsorships, and global commercial deals. So the revenue concentration can lead to higher ratios and larger gaps at the top of the league tables. But that's not true in every situation necessarily. Next slide. So on this slide, I'm going to leverage more of the sources that we use talking about financial fair play, promotion and regulate or talent promotion and regulation, relegation. First, financial fair play, again in Peter and Szymanski's work, was supposed to stop overspending, but they pointed out that it still favors large, rich clubs because they already have a lot of revenue. And then smaller clubs who might want to try and spend more and catch up are then limited. The Ramchandani and his co-authors look at competitive balance and financial fair play and find that some leagues became less balanced. Um, Strong clubs stayed strong for longer times, which ends up being seen in the Serie A and League of Portugal. But and then in Frick, Quancha, and Lang's study shows that talent concentration doesn't actually destroy competitive balance. They find that once you control for country and season, talent inequality doesn't always translate into large gaps in points. Um, so that really fits into the results for Ligue 1 and the Bundesliga. So as Mitchell also mentioned before, PSG and Bayern dominating the league for a lot of the seasons, still managed to be very competitive. Um, but they also found in their study that Liga Portugal was the least competitive. So our results kind of match up. Then the promotion and relegation system and the idea of open competition looked at by Ross and Szymanski, um, talks about how an open league and the threat of relegation just creates pressure at the bottom of the table and keeps that middle of the table to lower table teams more competitive. And then tying back to the point of the fan narrative of the Farmers League, the data shows that League One is actually the most competitive and has the lowest average ratio. So that data is actually a good way of thinking, just opposed to fan narratives. Next slide. So for the importance of our study and why competitive balance matters, for sports economics, testing theories about league structure, relegation, um, re regulation, and revenue is important, but then also tying it back to different studies such as Verman's and the work on financial fair play done by Peters and Szymanski and its effect on the recent seasons shows that with our fresh data that these ideas still hold true today. For leagues and the decision makers around them, this kind of analysis shows that revenue concentration does affect the results of the league. It highlights which leagues are drifting more towards imbalance, and then which leagues are also getting more competitive. And then for fans and media, again, it challenges the idea about what league is the most competitive and uses data instead of just saying that one league is worse than the other. Next slide. And then to wrap things up with our study, no league is ever going to be close to being perfectly competitive. And then that's just reflected with our ratios. Ligue 1 and the Bundesliga are the most competitive overall when you calculate their perfect points off win, losses, and draws. And Liga Portugal is the least competitive. So for our hypothesis saying that the Premier League was the most competitive league, that could be tied to the fact that it's one of the most globally famous, but it ends up being in the middle of competitive balance. It's also important to note that 9 out of the top 20 clubs in revenue belong to the Premier League. So the amount of spending in that league could also lead to this narrative that the Premier League is the most competitive. And then some limitations with our research. We only looked at 5 seasons. So what could have made this a little bit more in depth was looking back at maybe a period of 20 years or seeing how the effects of financial fair play regulations that were introduced by UEFA around 2013 would have affected our research. Competitive balance was also only measured off points. So using other metrics such as spending, expected wins, uncertainty of outcome, could have made our research a little bit better. And then more specific club spending isn't included. So you can go in depth on payroll and transfers to kind of get a deeper look at what could affect competitive balance in leagues across Europe. That's it. Thank you.